McGill University is marking 200 years, but some students do not feel like celebrating. The university, starting on March 31st of this year, began a year of marking and celebrating 200 years, right? In 1821, McGill University was founded. One McGill student joins us on the line right now. Fanta Ly is a law student at McGill. Fanta, welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me.
Let's first off talk about you. I know you're originally from Ontario, and of course you chose to go to McGill. You wanted to go to McGill, I imagine. So tell me about yourself and how you end up at McGill University.
Absolutely. So I did my undergrad at the University of Ottawa. I spent 3 years there, and then I went abroad to Sciences Po Paris for 1 year. And then I always knew I wanted to go to law school, so I applied both to law school and grad school, got into both. And thankfully, McGill actually let me defer my application. So I went and I did a master's in the UK, came back, and I was incredibly excited to go to McGill. I'm interested in international law. It was just the perfect school for me. But it ended up being the most disappointing educational experience I've ever had, and, the most racist institution I've ever been in.
From excitement to disappointment, the most racist institution you've ever been with. So hearing you say that, I never went to McGill, but it's disappointing because you know of the legacy of the institution. You're like, you want institutions to do better. So Fanta, tell us more on that, the racism. I should note to our listeners, you are Black. So tell us about that. Tell us about what you experienced.
Absolutely. I think the racism, I think what surprised me is that it really it's all its forms. From racial profiling, being asked IDs, and, seeing my white peers walk by not being asked for their IDs, from racial stereotyping comments in class from professors, that really hone into like racial stereotypes of like intellectual inferiority. It could be like a comment on a paper that could be like, well, the level of the class was very high. I once had a professor write, Congratulations for a class average that was B, you obtained a C plus. And the other really troubling issue is also the aspect of like retaliation, like speaking out on these different incidents. Like there's a lot of harassment that happens. And yeah, I think it's really disappointing to just, we know that racism and harassment, this is something that happens in, every type of organization, right? It's not something specific to McGill. But what really shocked me and what I find incredibly disappointing is the institutional response to these types of incidents and these types of events. And, even like the policy on harassment and discrimination, this is something that I've been working on for, more than a year. And, McGill is one of the only universities in Canada where members of the administrations are involved in these processes. And, there's clear conflicts of interest, and it's really not acceptable. McGill put in place an anti-Black racism action plan, which, it's really funny because, they're investing in outreach and hiring, which is incredibly important, but they're not actually doing anything. They're not actually tackling and putting in place measures to properly respond to harassment and discrimination.
We're with Fanta Ly, a law student at McGill. Fanta, so, big institutions, and especially the older they get, the harder it is to sort of enact change. So from your perspective, why do you think it's so slow in McGill University's case?
I think it's a question of leadership. McGill, it's really a question of leadership deficit. And I think that's where the barrier lies. I definitely think there's definitely a generational aspect, right? Because you have people, McGill is one of the only universities with an entirely white administration, and they benefit from the status quo, which is, having, Black staff who work in, subordinate positions. And if you look at over the past year, many universities have actually appointed, either a vice provost or a vice principal equity, and you have a Black person leading this plan. McGill actually appointed a white man to lead an anti-Black racism action plan. Now, of course, that doesn't mean that this plan was going to fail, but from my current assessment, I really see the impact of having someone who isn't directly impacted by these issues leading this plan, because the McGill administration is picking what they want to invest in and what they want to correct, and that doesn't actually tackle anti-Black racism.
Fanta, I know whenever we talk about McGill's history, subject of James McGill comes up. There's thoughts of, the statue of James McGill on the campus, that kind of stuff. Part of me says, geez, I worry that they'll go with symbolism in certain respects and not go with actual change. Do you have any concerns as to where this actually ends up and what change actually ends up happening at McGill?
Absolutely. I mean, this is actually a concern that I initially had, and I was speaking with some of my colleagues who are very involved in the Take James Down campaign, and I was wondering, well, if we focus on the statute, does that mean that they're not going to, focus on other things? Are they going to, remove the statute and say, hey, we fixed anti-Black racism? But, my peers have really honed into the fact that it doesn't have to be one or the other, right? Mm-hmm. Having that statue there is quite problematic, and it definitely doesn't send, a good message to the Black community. And, and I think it's more than symbolism. No one is saying, completely destroy the statue, but, it could be relocated in a museum or elsewhere. But I do share that concern that seeing already that the McGill administration is picking and choosing what they want to focus on when it comes to anti-Black racism, rather than actually, they've listened to the needs and concerns. That's we can give them a shout out for that. Good job. You've done great consultations. But if you ignored the results of these consultations, then, you've just wasted our time.
Fanta, I want to thank you for coming on the show. We're out of time, but I do want to thank you for allowing us to reflect a little bit on McGill University and its position as an institution in the city. Thanks so much.
Thank you for the invitation.
That's Fanta Ly, a law student at McGill University.